Welcome to Unlayered, the show where we talk about next generation blockchains. I'm your host, Dave, and joined by Sal, and also Zen Llama this week, as we're going to just do a bit of a round table and get up to speed on all things crypto. So how you doing, guys?
Doing well.
Pretty well, pretty well.
Well, it's been a bit of a interesting market recently, quite depressing on the timeline. Not sure how you're seeing it at your end, but I think Ansem in particular is in the firing line right now as a result of celebrity meme coins. So maybe let's just start there. What do we think about celebrity meme coins, and is Ansem wrong to be encouraging this sort of behavior and bring it to Solana? What do you think, Zen?
I don't know. I don't think it's like anyone's place to call anything like wrong or right. Generally, I think like it's pretty much on the celebrity themselves to do it right. Like I do actually like think Iggy's pretty based.
She's cool.
Like initially I was like, oh, okay, what? This is another celebrity, and then I started like reading her tweets, and I was like, yo, this chick's based. So like now I follow her. I was just like, yeah, that's cool. So yeah, I don't know. I honestly think like everyone who's like in the spotlight has like a villain arc, right? At some point when like the cycle turns, like prices down, people get angry and start yelling about things. Like even on the tech side, like honestly my feed's like more tech oriented, right? Um and even on that side, it just feels like all the arguments are just like recycled and like the same things we've been arguing about all bear market. And it's like there's just kind of like less energy to argue it. It's like, okay, well, we've argued this for like 3 years, like, are we just gonna keep talking about the same things, right? And the celebrity cycle, I think, like, it feels a little bit to me like, okay, like you're just getting mad at people again for doing the same thing that people have done in crypto, like time memoriam. So, yeah, I guess I just like, I find it hard to place blame with any single one person, right? I do think like he's been pretty decent about saying like, hey, if you're gonna come into this space, like, like take some time to learn about it. Um, I'll be honest, I don't like follow enough of Ansem's tweets to have like the deepest opinion on every tweet, right? Um, but yeah, like generally that's my feeling.
Yeah, I mean, maybe we could start with like the exchange, the Anthem Kobe exchange. I think good points were made on both sides. I think that there's a lot of negative attention directed towards celeb coins when in a long enough time scale, they're absolutely net good for the space because
Mm.
they just bring more people in. If you just boil it down to that, that's kind of what they do. I think it's interesting that we celebrated, musicians and celebrities and etc. Oftentimes jumping into NFTs. We had Justin Bieber bought a Bored Ape, for instance, and etc. etc. Um, there was a lot less negativity around it back then, but for some reason, because meme coins have this reputation for just being honest about not having utility, um, and oftentimes these projects don't have any sort of institutional backing. It's a lot easier to point the finger and say like, hey, they're promoting something that doesn't bring any value to the space. I think they do bring value to the space. There is a good point to be made that celebrities are only interested in extracting value, and there's no risk to them if they use their name to launch something that ends up going to zero. They'll still have their regular fans, and a bunch of people might lose their money, but I feel like there's kind of an oversimplification, and oftentimes what celebrities are actually trying to do is the exact thesis of NFTs back in the day, and in my view, where meme coins are going, which is a vehicle to allow users, fans, to do things with the celebrity that's not otherwise possible or not easily done on traditional financial rails. And this is also where I think the discourse you hear on shows like Chopping Block, where they just completely miss the mark and they don't really grasp what's actually happening here. I see a lot of ivory tower syndrome with this topic. Comments from people like Hayden, people like Vitalik, all just kind of crowding into this narrative saying it's bad, it's stupid, it's a waste of time. Usually the most interesting things that are built anger a lot of people, and they create this really kind of whiplash effect in discourse. So that's why I think this primitive is actually going to be one of the most interesting of the cycle and the most useful from a utility standpoint. So I'm pretty excited about it. Let's call them eccentric people, or just generally the people that have been criticizing meme coins.
It does feel the longer that people stay in the space, the sort of more negative they become. You know, it happened with the Bitcoin maxis, and now we're sort of seeing almost ETH boomer maxis who are just sort of hating on anything new that comes along.
They're hating it because
did you guys-
they don't have the activity. If the activity was happening on ETH, they would
On
all be
ETH.
celebrating it.
Yeah, did you guys see
It's really
the,
that simple.
Did you see the tweet that was like Solana should be made illegal?
Oh my god!
Yeah.
It'll be shut down.
Yeah, like it needs to be like shut down immediately. Yeah.
The moment any of this
I-
infra gets usage because people are trading on it, then all the investors and such, they'll be singing the praises of these things. But because they're offsides of Solana, they have been for a year now. Oh, and all the actions happening on Solana. Yeah, it's time to criticize it, right? And that's what I think is also playing into this, that people are talking less about.
But I mean, to play devil's advocate, I do think there's an issue, but I think it's a long-standing issue, which is in crypto, whenever we have these like hyped launches, so we had it with ICOs, we've had it with hyped NFT launches, and now we've got it with celeb meme coins, which of course everyone's going to want to gen into. We're just, as an industry, not very good at creating guardrails, at creating apps which stop the person who's creating it from just stealing the money. I mean, the best we've come up with so far was NFT Craze last cycle, where after a week, Magic Eden would lock the tokens post-mint for a week, and then they would give it to the creators, at which point they would rug. So it's no real protection. I remember ICOs, Vitalik used to talk about maybe we should introduce these new types where the money gets locked up and then it gets released over a certain period of time, depending on if they've actually achieved certain objectives. So I just feel like because everyone's going to want to buy into these and because there's going to be a lot of celebs who are going to want to take advantage of that fact, I think it's dangerous at the moment, basically. And for what it leads to me to is that I think we're on the cusp probably of some mega social app in crypto. And I really hope that we see it this cycle, because there's a lot of interest in this stuff, but we just need the ability to stop celebs coming in and just taking that money out straight away. It should just be locked up, or they don't receive any of the tokens. Instead, they receive like trading fees, things like that. But
I mean, the technology exists. Like, it could be locked in a Streamflow contract. And like, honestly, one of Iggy's tweets was pretty based about like her like wallet. She was like, I can't touch that money. Like the social, aspect of this and building the brand and everything I'm building around this is more important than like the LP pool that's there or that wallet, which is like kind of how you would want people to look at this, like when, a DApp launches an LP pool for their token, you're not sitting there going like, oh, they might just like sell this all, right? It's there for liquidity, for their product, for users, right? To like enable trading. And so I do think like we just need more people who are thinking like that and looking at like, honestly, like I think calling cryptocurrency like cryptocurrency was like probably the fundamental sin, right? Because now everyone thinks of it as just like a monetary instrument rather than like a social coordination like mechanism, right? And so yeah. But at the same time, it's like, what did you think would happen when mass consumer apps came on chain? Like, if you look at the content we see on like TV and radio and everything, like this is the content that sells. Like, this is mass consumer stuff. Like, so I don't know. Yeah, a little bit. It feels a little bit like high horse. Like this is what pop culture is. So.
Yeah, for sure. For sure. This is just a manifestation of what's going on in society. We're bringing culture on chain. But I think there is one pernicious thing about meme coins, which you didn't have with NFTs and didn't really have with ICOs, which is that they can just buy up the tokens straight away from other accounts and then tell everyone what the contract address is. So with that way, the reputation piece semi goes away if you manage to keep those accounts disconnected, because people don't even know that you own, however much percent of the token. So again, it comes down to, if you're going to have celebs launching this stuff, it's going to have massive appeal. And I think we just need an app with some guide rails just to stop the celebs taking advantage.
Right. Well, that stuff's not hard to do though. So one example, Bubble Maps is really good at showing you flows, right? Connecting wallets that's disconnected, showing you the snipers, what allocation they have. That's a few lines of code. If we can add it, into what we're building at Bullpen, and other apps can add it too. I think Pump Fund has it for all of their tokens. So those guardrails aren't hard to build.
We have the power.
I do think the form factor will change a little bit. I don't think it's just going to be people launching these things.
I agree.
Going at it. I think there'll be not new token standards, but perhaps taking advantage of what you can do with existing token standards, like on Solana Token 2022 with transfer hooks, or maybe having a more methodical way, the mint event happening where it's not all done at once, where you can kind of control for individual actors trying to accumulate supply. This stuff can be innovated on at the product level to better align all the stakeholders. So we're just seeing like the very most basic experiments of this happening with the Celeb coins. It'll get a lot more refined, I think, pretty quickly.
I do have a question. Like, do you think, I think last cycle, right, for NFTs, right, there was the most basic form of the NFTs, the 10K PFP, and it was kind of in this like similar, just like launch, get the money, there's a project, meta. And it never really progressed into like everyone, you'd be on late night spaces talking about NFTs, and they'd be like, oh, it's going to represent asset rights, and it's going to, give you access to all these things, and then yawn. And I guess I do wonder a little bit, like, is this like meme coin meta going to stop there? Or like, are we actually going to take that next step, right? Like, this cycle feels a little bit like, okay, no one invested in apps, and now we have all this infra, and like, like, are we actually going to take that next step? Are we going to build these things that are like clearly possible with the technology we have today? So I would be interested to see like someone do that, right?
But the biggest blocker is just awareness, especially amongst bigger personalities that are not in crypto that could bring in a lot of attention, which is why I think it's so important that you kind of welcome these new users with open arms. Crypto is very small. It's pretty irrelevant if you look at it in the grand scheme of things. I don't know, isn't the market cap of crypto smaller than like NVIDIA at this point, or it's on par, right? We need way more people touching this stuff. Every time I talk to a normie about crypto, they seem afraid of it. It's completely unapproachable. So the last thing we need to do is just continue whatever it is that we're doing now, which is pontificating about MEV, infra, layer 2, layer 3, and start actually just running more experiments, even if, they're not all going to go perfectly well, as we've seen this past few weeks, but there are going to be some small victories that can compound over time. And that's also why I like that meme coins and the fungible token standard over NFTs. They're simpler than NFTs, but they accomplish a lot of the same things. Can we make this even simpler for people to understand? Last cycle, you never really heard of a celebrity minting an NFT on their own. They would have to get an artist, they have to come up with a concept, do all these steps, and then kind of put out a collection. Now, the barriers to entry just got 10 to 100x smaller. And we can make those barriers to entry even smaller while hopefully building in some sort of incentive alignment mechanisms as well.
Yeah, it would be great to introduce a bit more utility to these meme coins, I think, for sure. Because for the longest time, it's been hard to actually add utility to crypto because worries about regulation. But it feels like if the utility is access to a celebrity or access to be able to buy tickets early, it doesn't feel that that's anywhere near sort of security level, because you have those things in Web 2 anyway. So I'd love to see more utility being brought to this, and also I'd just love to see more apps. I think it has been a pretty disappointing cycle so far with just the dearth of apps. And Sal, I know obviously you've raised money for your own app and you've gone through that process, but I'm imagining it's because it's been so difficult to actually raise money for apps, certainly during the bear market.
Yeah. No, literally, VCs didn't allocate to apps at all a year
Yeah.
ago. We even had podcast episodes where the ratio we heard was 6-1 infra to apps. I think that'll change now just because there's way too much infra and it's completely undifferentiated, like almost universally undifferentiated, where one L2 versus another. If you're a developer, you are never going to spend any time trying to decide if you should build on Base versus Blast versus Linnea, et cetera, et cetera. Developers are very lazy and they want to actually build something useful. So they'll just choose the shortest path, which I think today is Solana. There's users, there's liquidity, there's dexes, there's everything you need. There's information, there's data. You can get all that wrapped up in a nice API served to you, put it in your front end. You're not going to bother messing around with all of these L2s. So I think now the money will start flowing downstream to the applications, overabundance of infra, underabundance of apps, a lot less competition in apps, frankly, these days. There's just not that many of them. And it's complete reversal from where we were last year.
I think like even just here at Monad, like we're seeing, you know, we have good tech, but like the main reason people want to come over to Monad is community, not tech, right? They want like users, like quite frankly, like they want users for their apps, right? They want a community of people ready to use their apps, you know? And like as much as the tech is a differentiator, like having a community of excited people ready to use your app is just as big as a differentiator, right? And over, you know, like L2s and this and that, and we were talking a little bit before the show, how like I do actually think it's a little bit dangerous to call everything Ethereum, right? Because like social communities kind of need their own identity. You know, like Monad started building its identity like well before traditionally you would say that it was like time to do so, you know, launching a product. Yeah. But at this point we have like fantasy creatures like just being popped up from the community randomly and it's like hilarious, you know? And like looking back, it was like probably the best thing we did, right? And it's just like, wow, like, you know, people just want to actually build somewhere where there's like people excited about what's going on and that they kind of have a cultural identity or could see themselves like being part of the culture, right? I think Ethereum in the early days, that was Ethereum, right? Like Ethereum started as a monolithic L1, right? And everyone was there. The culture was there. The crypto culture was there. You know, Solana is a monolithic L1. Like they went through like the collective trauma of FTX and everything together that just like bonded the chain like none other, you know. And now Monad, like we started building it like a year ago, if not more. And we look at all the L2s and like, you know, like the tech will get there eventually. Like I do think Monad has better tech anyways, but like they don't, at least I haven't seen an L2 besides maybe Blast with like a real standout culture, right? Um, and so, yeah, I think that's actually like kind of under indexed in
Yeah.
current circles.
I feel like it's almost diluted with the L2s because there's one of 50, one of 100. And so all you're ending up on most of these chains is like mercenary airdroppers. And it's very, very difficult if you know that there's another 5, 10, 15 coming up where you can also do exactly the same. It's so, so difficult for anyone to actually stay put in a particular ecosystem. Whereas when you're on an L1, as we've had with Solana, we've had this sort of airdrop season, but people are staying. They're not generally moving on to the next chain because you're in this walled garden and you generally want to just keep your assets there. You don't want to just keep hopping around. So yeah, for me, it just lessens it a bit. Whereas I think Monad being an L1, L1s tend to, have always created these huge communities. And I think Monad as well, it benefits from being more of a shiny new toy than an L2 does. Even if you built Monad and you could make it an L2, it still wouldn't be quite as exciting, I don't think, as being a standalone L1. So, yeah. the culture layer is real.
Yeah, I honestly think it's probably the most important layer, to be honest. Like, because at the end of the day, like cryptocurrency is social coordination. So like you need the social people wanting to coordinate to make it useful. Like otherwise, what do you got? You just got a coin.
How do you think that scales over time? I mean, we already saw with Ethereum, it essentially just fragmented into a gazillion L2s and execution environments. And I feel like it kind of lacks, maybe it doesn't lack it, but it's not as strong as like something like Solana.
Yeah, I mean, like I honestly think taking a page out of Solana's book is not a bad idea in the sense that like the culture on Solana is not about like some like narrow technical like belief, right? Like the culture on Solana was very like I'm here, I'm vibing, I'm having friends, right? And like I honestly think that's the secret sauce. Like if like whether it's Ethereum, Monad, Solana, like if your friends are building on a chain, if your friends are transacting on a chain, that's where you stay.
Mm.
You know? Like fundamentally you're just like the switching cost is high and all my friends are here, so I'm going to stay here. Like and like I really just think it's that. Like it just needs to be a fun place to be. You know, and Monad's vibe is kind of like I think Solana is kind of maybe like the cool kid in the room, and like Monad is like the goofy like fantasy child of the room, right? But it's fun, right? Like I do think it's like wholesome, it's cool. It like it hits a certain like class of people the right way, right? And we'll see as like we actually launch and like more people come into the ecosystem how that culture develops. But like at least like Ethereum back in the normal days, like at least everyone like, and this is before even I was in Ethereum, but when you talk to people, back in like 2016, 2017, they were like, oh, it was like, the cool, quirky place to be where the cyberpunks were, where like things were being built, right? And that definitely seems to have like switched to Solana now. Like that's where all the cool things are being built right now. Um, so yeah, like I honestly think it's just like where my friends are at. It's like where I'm gonna be. So.
Yeah, and again, on Ethereum, if you're on one EVM L2, your friends aren't necessarily all just going to stay there because they're probably likely to deploy across a load of different L2s. So yeah, you're just sort of losing this locus of personality really around these L2s, especially as we're going to keep on seeing more and more being deployed, more and more airdrops coming, more and more VC money being pumped into it.
And I actually do think like eventually fragmentation will be solved. I think it's just going to take so long that like they're going to miss the boat, right? It's like it's kind of clear that like there's this like energy wanting social apps, right? Wanting like things to do on chain. And if it's another two, like we were told like L2s would be ready what? At the beginning of last cycle? It's been 4 years, right? Optimism just had implemented fraud proofs. Like how many more years for like this ZK integrated stuff? If it's another 5 years, like the market's just going to move, and it's not that I don't think it'll be done. I just think like the market's going to move, like the timing's going to be off. Like you need to be building for what people want to do today.
The other point is that scaling approach can be superseded by, a new L1 or ecosystem that can just get a lot more users like in one snap. Like Ton kind of did this where basically in like a few months they got 40 million users. You can argue if they're quality or not. They're mostly click farming, but they're doing stuff on chain and there's that many wallets made now inside of Telegram. You could make the argument this will happen again with another L1 or L2 and just kind of completely supersede what Eth was able to accomplish in that time.
Yeah, I mean, I was using Ton for the very first time this week, and it's genuinely incredible. You're just on Telegram, and you create a wallet within Telegram app, and it all happened within 30 seconds or something, and then straight away you're playing these sort of mini games on Telegram. It feels completely different, and I can 100% see why it's got such a following now. Why it's valued at about 25%, I think, of the market cap of Solana. And it maybe in my mind, I think that we've got Solana, we've got Ethereum. I think it's going to be really, really, really difficult for new L1s to come in. I think Monad's got the best chance out of all of them, and Ton's doing great. But I think it's going to be really, really difficult as we go forward for anyone to come in and disrupt these guys. I think the only ones who can are most likely to be the guys with big, big distribution. If a Facebook chain, if a Google chain came in, would they be able to pick up a load of users on day one? The answer is absolutely yes. So I think that may be the way that it goes, especially if we start seeing lots of L2s being put up by lots of these big institutions. As we've always said, there's a strong motivation if you're an L2 to become your own L1. So who knows what the future unfolds, but I think distribution of these established TradFi players is huge and could really come in and instantly become a big player.
I mean, I've always been worried about this. Like, if Apple launched a blockchain, goodbye. It's game over.
Yeah.
Everyone has an Apple phone in their pocket. They're not going to care if it's permissionless or not. Like, if there's apps that are better because they're on a blockchain and it's powered by Apple, they're going to use it, right? Just like we saw with they're doing the AI thing and they're building like the private cloud, right? It's probably not great that's like private infrastructure is being like relied on by one company, but people trust them. Like, they just fundamentally trust them, and they trust them to have their OPSEC right, and everyone's going to use it, right? And I think we see it with Ton. Like, the thesis has played out, I think, 2 or 3 times now. Like, Base got a lot of adoption. Ton has picked up adoption faster than almost anyone. Like, as a crypto native blockchain, I think distribution is like almost the key player. Like, I think the reason we're slated to do pretty well is because we started building our community a year and a half before launch, right? Like, it really takes that. And, Ton, I hadn't heard about it until maybe 6 months ago. 40 million users, like, that might be the first blockchain with 100 million users on it. Like, at that point, like, they could supersede everyone.
Is that right? Is that right? I'm still struggling to come to terms with this number. I knew that hamster game had a huge number of users, but
Yeah.
most people say it is just bots, basically, or maybe it's that meme of the motorbike with 100 mirrors, each with a phone on. So maybe.
Even if it's off by a factor of 10, that's still really material.
Yeah.
And so obviously Bullpen, we're a Telegram mini app. There's not that many of them out there. And so it feels to me, this reminds me so much of apps on the iPhone in 2008, 2009, 2010, when it was still really early, more like 08, 09. There's just so few out there. There's really not much to do besides quick farming. And it's going to get really sophisticated really quickly. What we're building is just one example of that. 1.5 billion users on Telegram. It's just such a massive starting point to build a community through. And the only Achilles heel is the lack of support in the US and the lack of usage of Telegram in the US. But besides that, yeah, I mean, these apps can and will get tens of millions of users. Just look at the USDT story, right? Like that feature launched, Tether on Ton that launched permissionless. And it's already at 500 million, I think, in issuance. It's massive. It's coming up. It's probably eclipsed most of the L2s at this point. People can use it to send money over text. And that infrastructure can power so much of DeFi.
It's interesting what you say that is it completely banned in the US then? Because I had read.
It's currently geofenced.
Yeah.
The wallet, that is.
Because it's interesting, isn't it, that people have said for a long time that we're likely to get geographically distributed blockchains, basically. And Ton, therefore, I believe, has a really big following in the East. In the West at the moment, I would say it's Solana and Base probably would be the 2 big ones. But nothing on the scale, as you say, of Ton, of that sort of level of distribution. So it does make you wonder if one of the big US companies will come out and do a Ton basically for the Western market, and likewise have USDC as the dominant stablecoin, whereas I assume Ton will be using USDT.
What would that be? That would be what? WhatsApp, maybe?
Yeah, I just don't see it happening. I think there is no other messaging app that's at that scale that has such an open API for developers. It's because we looked at all these. It's it's WhatsApp, it's iMessage, it's Telegram, Signal. I guess I don't know. I don't really think that's ever gonna be a mainstream
Yeah.
app. I'm probably missing one. Messenger's owned by Facebook, so that pretty much covers most of your bases there in terms of highly used messaging apps. WeChat's a Chinese app. I don't see that being used in the West. And their API is not open. It's all owned by one company that government's trying to push out farther. They're not trying to embrace. I put out a tweet that I think Telegram will start penetrating the U.S. market relatively soon. The only caveat is just the high usage of iPhones in the West is the massive hurdle to overcome those blue bubbles on iMessage. But there is a non-zero chance that happens. And the only threat to me is Apple. If they somehow decided to embrace crypto, then that would probably be the dominant blockchain.
Yeah, it's interesting. I don't know if they would though, because they'd have to they're really sensitive about opening APIs, right? You really can't do anything on Apple that they don't allow you to do. And so approaching blockchain fundamentally is the culture of building on a blockchain is I want to be able to do anything with anything. And so that is a big leap for Apple culture. We'll see if it ever happens. But kind of cool if it did. But my guess is it would not be permissionless. They're too big of a company to take the regulation risk for it, and it would probably most definitely be a KYC chain. Coin would probably be USDC or some Apple-backed stablecoin, and it would probably just get integrated into Apple Pay and things like that, right? I don't think it would look like blockchains we think today. I think it would literally just be a blockchain SDK kit for Apple developers, right? That just links into their private cloud.
But with Ton, so you're building on top of an app and using the APIs. But I remember reading in Chris Dixon's book, Read, Write, Own, that inevitably all companies, once they get big enough, they start to close off the APIs because they want to capture more of the value and they don't want necessarily all the devs to be capturing it instead. So isn't this likely to happen with Ton as well? Why do you think they would always keep the APIs open?
That's not going to happen for a few reasons. So Chris Dixon is not wrong. If you study what Facebook did, they used to have very open APIs. So the entire business of Zynga was built on this idea that you could message people, your friends could kind of DM other friends to hop in their Farmville or whatever. That's why you'd get all those notifications in 2009. And then Facebook kind of just turned that off. And that story's kind of repeated itself with lots of social networks over the years. I think Instagram, I believe they initially built their social graph on top of Twitter's, and then that got closed off. You can't do that. And even Elon with Twitter, you can't actually look at who's following who over the API unless you want to spend $43,000 a month, which is the cost for an enterprise plan. Telegram's interesting though, because it's a utility-based social network, meaning they already don't really make any money. They just introduced ads for channels 2 weeks ago. They're not driving tons of revenue in an algorithmic feed. What they actually want is to encourage that behavior, and they don't even know what's going to work yet. So they kind of have to just invite as many developers as possible to just coalesce around this ecosystem and try to be that base layer infra and monetize through alternative means. It could actually just be that Ton indirectly is a monetization vehicle for them through all the financial primitives that they can build and sustain. But I don't really fear Telegram is its ethos has always been that anyone can build on it. The client is open source. You can look at all the code and kind of build your own version of Telegram if you wanted to. The M-Proto client. So I would push back for that specific case against the notion that they could deplatform or rug the APIs. The API isn't really anything crazy. It's literally just the ability to render a web page inside of Telegram. That's essentially what a mini app is. The only difference is you can just tap into the user session on Telegram and have them log in with Telegram. That stuff, all of the social media companies enable that today, even Facebook and Google. So there's no upside in limiting that. I think that risk is very much overblown. And you could also make the argument about protocol itself, they have created so many, not created, but they're the backbone of a lot of unicorns were launched in the App Store. And yeah, sure, once in a while, Epic will throw a fit over the 30% tax, but in aggregate, they generally haven't really changed that much for developers.
How about the market cap of Ton? Do we think overvalued, undervalued, and can it catch up with Sol this cycle? So it's about 20, I think it's about 20 billion from memory, and Sol's about 80 billion.
If I remember correctly, I think it's owned by not that many people, so that's the biggest issue with Ton's supply. They're trying to solve that. That's why there's a big sale, I think, to Pantera. It's a hard one. It's just such a different story compared to Solana in terms of how that project came to be. That predictions on market cap are a little challenging until that supply gets a bit more distributed. But in all, I'm pretty directionally. I like where it's going. I don't think it's going to decrease. It is fundamentally just a different type of blockchain too, from just the architecture and like what it can actually support at a technical level. It's more of a distribution play. So yeah, I don't know. The answer is I'm not sure, but I do think they're going to continue to grow.
We'll have to get someone on the pod to talk us through it a bit more. But you said about distribution of tokens, but of course CZ, it was announced, I think, by Forbes this week. So it's not the most trustworthy source, but that CZ owns about like 55-60% of all BNB. So turns out that you can have like very limited distribution of the token and still get to a pretty almighty market cap. And a lot of people saying the only reason it's been ripping is because he can't sell while he's in jail.
I mean, yeah, it's like lower float. So
yeah, BNB is such an interesting story too, just because that coin is only relevant because of Binance, and so it's hard to like reverse out the order of operations if that story could ever repeat again. But I'm actually not that bullish BNB long term. I think that style of coin is going to get superseded by newer experiments.
What do we think of BNB generally without CZ at the head anymore?
Yeah, like Binance, I mean, it's still used a lot, I guess. I don't think they have a great on-chain strategy. I think Binance Smart Chain is going to basically lose to ecosystems like Solana or BNB Chain is, I guess, what you're supposed to call it now. The SEX is still used a lot. It's has a lot of liquidity. That's a hard one to overcome. But it doesn't feel to me like it's trending in a futuristic or future-facing direction.
Yeah, far more bullish on Coinbase's approach about really going all in on Base and and their investment in Circle and things like that. Whereas, yeah, BNB, it's interesting though what you said. I always imagined that most of the value is derived from the L1 premium, whereas I think you're suggesting it's mainly from the discounts. I think that holding BNB gives you on Binance. And obviously just having the biggest exchange in crypto behind it. But yeah, I think I'd always attributed it more to the layer one for some reason, but I'm sure you're right. I'm sure most of that value is from the centralized exchange.
I actually wonder how the like volumes of like meme coin trading on Binance are this cycle compared to last cycle, given that like Solana has entered the ring. Like I know last cycle was all on BNB.
Yeah, I think nowhere near would be the answer.
That you're talking about on-chain volume, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, I believe like Solana's already surpassed it in terms of where the action's happening. Yeah, I don't think it's PancakeSwap and all those, or I don't think it's as relevant now. You just never see it show up in chain agnostic tools like Dex Screener and so on, Dex tools. Like I used to see that a lot more last cycle. Now it's mostly like Solana is kind of the base pair.
How do we feel about Solana value accrual now that we have a lot more activity like Solana's passed, Ethereum and daily trading volumes, daily MEV capture, like fees, given all these things, yeah, they do have more inflation, but over the long term, like if they're also getting more fees, if they're also burning more Solana, if they're changing the fee model, that could change very, very quickly.
Yeah, exactly. Inflation is something which they could just bring down tomorrow if it went to a vote.
I mean,
So
it's with no vote right now, it's going to 1.5%.
yeah. I think in 2031.
Yeah.
But I think you have to be looking forward looking basically with these blockchains. And if you're looking at Ethereum, I think it's really hard to say that ETH, the asset, is going to be accruing a huge amount more revenues for the foreseeable future, because I don't think they're going to see a lot more on the L1. Justin Drake said on the Bankless podcast the other day that everyone should be on the L2. So it's all going to happen on the L2s. And as we know, very, very, very little of the revenue then goes up to the L1. So I think it's almost like they've now gone down a massive amount. It's probably going to take them 5 or 10 years before they can recapture all of the revenue that they would have had if it had stayed on the L1. Obviously, it's an impossible question because you couldn't have kept it all on the L1. There's just not enough capacity, but they're really sort of hindering their value accrual for the foreseeable future. So I think that Solana, for me, it's just playing out exactly as I expected. Lots and lots of, very high number of very low value transactions, and probably majority of the value will come in MEV, even though people don't like that, but it's just how these blockchains work. There is leakage and it ends up with the L1 token. So I think it is going how I expected it to. And as a result, I think Solana could have greater value accrual and probably a higher market cap than ETH, even if the Solana ecosystem is potentially even like considerably smaller than the Ethereum ecosystem, just because there's far less leakage within Solana. So yeah, when people, all they can say is the inflation rate is super high. Firstly, it's in line with Cosmos. I think he just borrowed their exact inflation schedule. And you never hear people complaining about the Cosmos schedule. And it's something which can just be changed, at the drop of a hat, basically, especially now that the validators are more and more profitable.
Well, I thought it was like very telling back when earlier in the bear market, like the debate was, is value going to accrue to the settlement layer or the DA layer? And they never talked about the execution layer. And I thought that was very, very telling. I was like, oh, like that's a blind spot. And in my mind, I'm like, it's definitely going to accrue to the execution layer. Like, where does the value in like a normal Web 2 app go? Like, yes, Amazon Web Services does capture some of it, but like most of it goes to Facebook. Most of it goes to the apps like building on top of it. To me, it was just like always so obvious. It's like clearly an execution.
Yeah, and they're offloading it. And I think in TradFi as well, the clearinghouses get a very, very, very small percentage of the total revenue that's going through. And that's basically what Ethereum is trying to aim for. And Ethereum's take rate is like 100 times higher. So it's very hard to imagine how they're actually going to become this settlement layer of global finance when their take rates are at like 100x higher than the TradFi equivalent. And
what do we think of the debate more generally? Like, who won, and like, do you agree with the economic security is a meme argument that Toly made?
Yeah. Basically, I didn't think it was particularly close. I didn't think any of Justin's points were particularly strong. The moment you say something like everyone should build on an L2, and then you just look at Coinbase taking home $50 million plus of revenue from being the sole sequencer with no economic incentive for them to decentralize it. I don't really understand what the thesis is with Ethereum at all. And I still don't to this day understand what economic security means. If someone could define it in very clear terms, that would be great. But if you can't, that's usually a sign that whatever it is you're describing isn't real.
And I mean, he said the main benefits of economic security, which I think Toly did sort of agree with at the end, is liveness and censorship resistance. But then at the same breath, he tells everyone to move to the L2s, which almost universally don't offer censorship resistance.
It's one of those cases where he's like, do as I say, not as I do. Right? Everyone says that stuff matters, but then when you actually observe actions taken by developers and users, they clearly don't care about that stuff. Because if they did, they wouldn't be building on a centralized L2 that has absolutely no path in the next year to decentralize any of its sequencer operations. I ignore it. I ignore what people say. I just focus on what are people doing on this chain or this ecosystem. Is it congruent with the ideals that they've been spewing for half a decade? No. So honestly, take any of that stuff seriously.
So I'm gonna take a little bit of the other side of this because so I've actually been talking to one of the Fire Dancer engineers, and I'm not gonna name him, but he's actually like a bigger ETH bull on the long term time scale, and it's like really interested to talk to him because he's like, in the end state of ETH being like this like stateless ZK root, like it is everything we would want in a blockchain, right? And like I'm like, you're right, but like the path to get there is so long that I'm not sure that like the market is going to wait around for it, right? And especially with the economic security thing, like I would actually say that I do think like it has some applications, and in an ETH centric world, where everything's a bridge, I actually think it does kind of matter because like in my mind, economic security, the main reason it's useful is if you have like in-flight economic value before settlement. Once you have settlement and it's like written to the blockchain, like you can't roll it back. Like at least for chains with like non-probabilistic finality, like Solana or Ethereum, right? At a certain point when it's finalized, like you can't roll it back. So what does it matter for the economic security? But for like an L2 or a bridge, which an L2 is essentially a bridge, right? That economic value before settlement is in flight, right? And so it needs to be secured by something. And that's where I think like the slashing guarantees and stuff like does kind of come in this world. So like from an ETH perspective, I think they're actually making a rational argument, right? In the sense that like, okay, if it's a world of like this ZK state root and it's a world of where everything settles to it and therefore there's like a lot of in-flight value, like it does actually need to be secured while it's in flight, right? And so in that sense, like I do kind of like think there's a point there. I just think it's very detached from the reality of the market today, right? And so I'm like, look, there is this like theoretical world where I think everything you say is correct. But it, like Sal was saying, if you look at the behavior of what's going on today, I just don't think that's the way that the market is moving, right? It's not the reality of like the landscape that we're playing in right now.
Yeah, and if it genuinely takes 5 years, as you say, I mean, Ethereum's been around 5 years and everyone says that it has unconquerable network effects at this point. So if Ethereum is really going to allow the competition 5 years before it can present a sort of unified roll-up infrastructure, yeah, it's hard, as you say, to see the market holding back long enough. Perhaps as we often say as well, the most bullish solution is some sort of very fast, probably highly centralized L2 that just garners 90% plus of all of the attention. But then you're competing with all the VC money and the airdrops, etc. So
all the research for ETH is not like, it's not exclusive to ETH. Like any L1 can use ZK. Like they can all like, like implement rollups. They can all like use ZK. So like, it's kind of weird to me that like that's the only solution. Like, sure, like I actually like agree with a lot of those theses, but like I don't see why it's always framed as like a mutually exclusive thing. Right? It's like you can have your cake and eat it too. Like in the same hardware advances that are going to speed up ZK are going to speed up non-ZK chips. Like AI is not afraid of hardware. They're going to make hardware fast, like whether blockchains do it or not. And so like the same scaling solutions that are going to use hardware to like speed up ZK are going to speed up the non-ZK stuff, and then when the ZK math is ready, you can just apply it to the fast L1 that doesn't use ZK, right? Like it all seems additive to me. So it all kind of, it feels weird when it's framed as like a mutually exclusive kind of technology battle, right?
Zen, I've just noticed that you're in, I think, the merch room, the Monad merch room.
Yes.
Is that where you're usually based?
Yeah. So I've moved to New York, so I'm a Brooklynite now. So I'm here in the Monad office. We're actually doing like a little like I guess we'll call it like our first like what would we call it? Maybe like a boot camp, maybe like an accelerator, right? It's our like our testing ground. Actually, Sal was invited to it because he's local here sometimes. And so yeah, we're kind of just like, you know, bringing some founders together, some native teams on Monet, and like trying to spin up that, you know, founder builder community and like see how that gets going. So it's been pretty exciting. So I actually like it's going on right now. So I like locked myself in the merch room for this episode.
No, it sounds sort of like Solana early days with the hacker houses, which I think were just sort of put together by developers at a conference, is what I remember Toly saying. They just did a sort of side event, basically.
Yeah, I think we're just like learning. Like we wanted to keep it pretty low key, right? It's kind of like our own testing ground. Like, how are we going to run these things? What's the vibe? You know, how do we scale this up? But it's pretty exciting. Like, there's definitely apps that are here that I'm pretty excited about. That I'm like, oh, this is cool. So yeah, I like honestly, I'm excited to see that energy come, right? Especially coming from the Solana side. Like, one thing is like incredibly clear when you go to Solana hackathons is like people are product focused and like shipping focused. And like it is cool to see that energy starting to come out. Especially just today was the first day, right? I had my first office hour with the team to go over their technical architecture of their app, and I was like, damn, these guys are like building something cool. And like it was just, it's cool to see. It's like, okay, maybe we're getting back to some like real building culture here on the EVM side.
Yeah, I want to see fewer charts on the timeline and more apps. So, all right, I'm here
Tall
for
ask.
It's a very tall ask, actually.
Well, I think we want to try and tag on some fun little thing at the end, but I think maybe we've run over time, so maybe we should leave it for next time. But yeah, I think it's been a great chat, and look forward to doing it again, hopefully next week.
Sounds good.